The universe stretched out in endless silence, vast, cold, indifferent. Across 27,000 star systems, civilizations flourished and crumbled, bound not by alliances or shared destiny but by something far more mundane: bureaucracy. The Galactic Classification Authority had spent centuries meticulously cataloging every known sentient species, ranking them by evolutionary traits, intelligence, and most importantly, threat level. Humans had always been an anomaly. Deathworlders, class 3, mostly harmless. But there was an asterisk. That asterisk led to Appendix Q, a supposedly detailed analysis of why humans constantly defied logical expectations. It was supposed to explain why their species had survived conditions that should have eradicated them, why they thrived in environments where others perished. But there was a problem. Appendix Q was missing. It had been misplaced, lost in a bureaucratic black hole, or, as some suspected, deliberately buried. Xenobiologist Zex Rahl of the Lenticulan Scientific Academy had been chosen to verify the inconsistencies. A routine research mission, the Academy had called it, a groundbreaking opportunity. But as Zex stood in the sterilized interior of the research vessel, staring down at the blue-green anomaly below, all four of its compound eyes blinked in different patterns of unease. The planet looked peaceful, deceptively so. White clouds drifted across vast oceans, green land masses spread out like a living organism. But Zex knew better. Humans called this place Earth, and everything about it defied sense. The ship's AI broke the silence, its voice unnervingly cheerful. "Environmental adaptation complete. You may now disembark." Zex hesitated even through the protective layer of its exosuit. The crushing gravity of this world pressed down like an invisible hand. The atmosphere was thick with reactive oxygen, a substance most civilizations kept bound in compounds rather than letting it drift freely. Yet here, the air was saturated with it. A dangerous, chaotic planet. And yet, humans flourished. The ship had landed in a remote region, a place untouched by the artificial sprawl of human cities. The northern Cascade Mountain Range, a wilderness of jagged cliffs, towering trees, and rushing rivers. Zex ran a final systems check, no signs of immediate threats, no large predators in the vicinity. The location had been carefully chosen, isolated enough to avoid mass human contact, yet close enough to study them in their natural state. This was the first step in understanding the species, a simple observation mission. At least, that was the plan. 3 standard days into the expedition, the first anomaly appeared. Zex's scanners detected a human approaching. The xenobiologist moved quickly, activating the camouflage field, an advanced piece of technology designed to bend light around its form, rendering it nearly invisible, or at least it was supposed to. "I can see you, you know." The voice was casual, amused. Zex froze. A male human stood barely 10 meters away, arms resting loosely at his sides. He carried what appeared to be primitive survival equipment strapped to his back. His stance was relaxed, unthreatening, yet something in his gaze felt predatory. "Your cloaking device is making the pine needles bend the wrong way. Neat tech, though." Zex hesitated, then deactivated the camouflage. Failure at the worst possible moment, another universal constant. The human's mouth curved upward, a behavior that Zex's xenobiology database flagged with 2 possible meanings, either friendliness or imminent attack. "You're studying us, aren't you?" the human said, adjusting the straps of his pack. "Trying to figure out if we're dangerous?" Zex straightened. "I am conducting non-invasive observational research. Your planet's classification status requires verification." The human nodded, as if this were the most normal conversation in the world. "So your bosses are confused." Zex hesitated. Confusion implies uncertainty. The Academy merely requires verification of statistical anomalies regarding your species' survival capabilities. The human laughed, a sound that made Zex's sensory receptors spike. It was not a threat display, but it was something else. Something unnervingly self-assured. "Wait till you see what we do for fun." A warning flashed across Zex's internal display, 17 different risk markers activated. The human stepped closer, extending one hand. Name's Kane. Wilderness guide. Was planning a solo trek, but showing an alien around? Way more interesting. Zex hesitated. Direct physical contact with unclassified species was strictly against protocol, filed under ways to contract exotic diseases and/or lose appendages. But something about the human's demeanor, the way he carried himself, it defied all expected reactions. Humans should fear the unknown, should react with caution, hesitation, wariness, and yet this one was offering to help. Zack slowly extended a manipulator appendage. The human's hand clasped around it firmly. The xenobiologist's internal systems immediately flagged the gesture as problematic. This was no longer a detached scientific study. It had just become something far more dangerous. It had become personal. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the distant sounds of the wilderness. Birds calling, the rustling of unseen creatures moving through the undergrowth. The human Kane moved with an ease that Zax found unsettling. Every step was measured, precise, his breathing controlled, his posture relaxed, but alert. It was as if he belonged here, as if the forest itself was an extension of him. Zex followed, its exosuit automatically adjusting to the uneven terrain. Despite the advanced stabilization technology, every movement felt unnatural. The suit had been designed for high-gravity environments, but nothing in its programming had prepared it for this. For Earth. For humans. You all right back there? Kane asked without turning. Zex hesitated. Humans were notoriously social creatures. Communication was constant, even when unnecessary. The xenobiologists had read this in reports, but experiencing it firsthand was something else entirely. My systems are fully functional. Kane glanced over his shoulder, his expression unreadable. So, what exactly are you hoping to find out? Zex processed the question, truth or deflection? It chose something in between. Your species displays significant survival anomalies. Evolutionary theory suggests that such high-risk environmental factors should have resulted in either extreme specialization or widespread extinction, yet humans persist. Kane grinned. And that freaks out your scientists, huh? Zex hesitated. It raises questions. The human's expression shifted. Just slightly, but it was enough. There was a flicker of something behind his eyes. Amusement, but also understanding. You want to see how we survive? Zex registered a 74% probability that saying no would be ignored. It nodded. Kane adjusted the straps of his pack. All right then, let's get started. They moved deeper into the wilderness. The terrain grew steeper, the trees denser, the sounds of civilization faded until there was nothing but the pulse of the wild. Zex's internal systems flagged multiple environmental hazards: uneven ground, unstable rock formations, potentially hostile fauna. Kane, however, moved as if he were completely unbothered. At one point, he crouched near a fallen tree, brushing his fingers over the dirt. His eyes scanned the ground with intentional focus. Something passed through here recently. Zex's sensors detected disturbances in the soil composition, subtle shifts in pressure that suggested heavy footfalls. Animal? Kane nodded. Yeah, big one, probably a bear. Zex's xenobiology database flickered to life. Apex predator. Massive musculature. Capable of exerting lethal force with a single strike. The probability of non-fatal human-bear encounters was statistically insignificant. Kane seemed unbothered. You're aware that such creatures are categorized as highly dangerous? The human smirked. Yeah, but they're also beautiful. Zex faltered. Your species admires predators. Kane stood, dusting his hands off. Of course. Deadly things are often the most beautiful. The xenobiologist filed that statement away for later analysis. By nightfall, they had reached a clearing. Kane called it a campsite, but Zex recognized it for what it truly was, a temporary survival outpost in hostile territory. The human set down his pack and moved with efficient precision. Within minutes, he had assembled a shelter, started a fire, and prepared a primitive meal. Zex had observed countless intelligent species, but there was something different about the way humans interacted with their environment. They didn't just survive in it, they adapted to it, bent it to their will. And yet, despite their capabilities, there was a reverence in the way Kane moved, an understanding that this place, the wilderness, was not to be tamed, only respected. Zex sat motionless, its internal systems whirring with new data. Kane took a sip from a metal container, steam rising from the liquid inside. "What's up?" Zex analyzed the chemical composition, caffeine, water, various plant compounds. "Your species consumes stimulants recreationally?" Kane chuckled. "Yeah, helps wake us up." Zex hesitated, then reached for the container. Kane watched with barely concealed amusement as the xenobiologist raised it to its respiration vent. The moment the liquid hit its system, Zex's neural processors nearly short-circuited. "This is a controlled substance on 17 worlds?" Kane grinned. "Yeah, we call it coffee." Dawn broke over the mountains in a burst of gold and fire, the sky shifting from deep indigo to brilliant orange. Zex had spent the entire night running risk assessments, probability models, recalibrating its understanding of human adaptability. None of it made sense. Kane, however, had slept soundly on the ground, wrapped in nothing but fabric and confidence. He stretched, letting out a groan as he stood. "Hope you got some rest. We've got a long hike ahead." Zex hesitated. "My exosuit maintains biological function through energy conservation cycles." Kane gave him a look. "So, you didn't sleep?" "Correct." The human smirked. "Yeah, you're gonna need coffee." Zex calculated a 63% probability that refusing would lead to further unnecessary discussion. It accepted the offer. Kane grinned and passed over the highly questionable beverage. "All right, time to see how you handle real wilderness." The deeper they went, the more Zex's understanding of survival began to unravel. Kane pointed out various signs of wildlife, subtle indicators that predators roamed these lands. "See that claw mark on the tree? Bear sharpening its claws means this is part of its territory." Zex's internal threat assessment matrix immediately activated. "Your species voluntarily ventures into predator-controlled zones?" Kane shrugged. "How else are we supposed to see them?" Zex's database flagged this as complete evolutionary lunacy. And yet, it wasn't just recklessness. There was calculated awareness in Kane's movements, a sharpness in his gaze. He wasn't reckless, he was prepared. And that was far more dangerous. By midday, they had reached a ridge overlooking a dense valley. Kane slowed his steps, his posture shifting. Something was wrong. "Stay still." Zex detected a heat signature in the underbrush below, large, muscular, moving slowly. Kane exhaled, his voice dropping to a whisper. "We're not alone." From the shadows, something massive moved. A deep, rumbling growl echoed through the valley. Zex's sensors registered a spike in atmospheric pressure, changes in wind direction, an unmistakable scent in the air. "Predator." Kane's hand instinctively went to his pack. Zex calculated the probability of a non-violent resolution. 4%. The bear emerged from the trees. It was 3 meters tall, its muscles rippling beneath thick fur, and it was staring directly at them. Kane's grip on his pack tightened. "All right." His voice was calm, controlled. "If I say run, you run." Zex's processors flashed red with imminent danger warnings. The bear took a step forward, its growl vibrating through the earth. Kane's voice dropped lower. "Not my first bear." The world slowed. Zex's sensors were running at maximum capacity, scanning every micro movement of the creature in front of them. A grizzly bear, 400 kilograms of muscle, claw, and apex predatory instinct. Its breath came in slow, powerful huffs, hot vapor curling in the cold morning air. Each exhale was a warning, a challenge. Zex's exosuit flagged the situation as critical, survival probability plummeting. Kane stood his ground. When I say run, you run. Zex's calculations were clear. Running would trigger a pursuit response. Your species lacks the physical capability to outrun such a predator, it stated, keeping its voice modulated for neutrality, despite the very real probability of being torn apart in the next few seconds. Kane didn't look away from the bear. I don't need to outrun it, I just need to make it rethink its options. Zex's risk assessment algorithms began to break. The bear took another step forward, its claws scraping against the stone beneath its paws, its muscles tensed. It was going to charge. Kane reached into the side pocket of his utility garment. Slowly, deliberately, a small canister, a primitive defense mechanism. Zex recognized it from earlier analysis. Capsaicin-based aerosol dispersal device, commonly referred to as bear spray. Chemical deterrents have an efficacy rate of only 78%, Zex warned, watching as Kane adjusted his stance. The bear growled, its massive head swinging side to side in an unmistakable pre-aggressive assessment behavior. Kane's voice remained steady. Then I'll handle the other 22%. The bear roared. The sheer force of the sound hit Zex's audio receptors like a shockwave. The predator lunged, a blur of fur and raw power. Kane moved first. A sharp hiss filled the air as he depressed the canister, unleashing a thick, burning cloud of irritant chemicals directly into the bear's face. The creature staggered mid-charge, snarling, shaking its head violently as the irritant took effect. But it didn't stop. It redirected and collided into Kane at full speed. The impact was brutal, a wall of muscle hitting a much smaller, much weaker body. Zex's sensors detected 4 separate points of blunt force trauma as Kane was sent tumbling across the rocky ground. The xenobiologist's self-preservation instincts engaged immediately. It scrambled backwards, searching for an escape route, its mind already processing the statistical inevitability of human death. But Kane wasn't dead. He was already getting up, bleeding, bruised, but not broken. The bear, still partially blinded, shook itself violently, snorting, paws swiping at the air. It hesitated just long enough for Kane to adjust his stance. Then the human did something no rational prey species would ever do. He took a step forward. Zex's entire database of survival behavior fractured. You are engaging the predator? Kane flexed his bleeding fingers, rolling his shoulders. His breath was coming hard and fast, but his eyes burned with something else entirely. Not fear, not panic. Something else. Something
Damn right
worse.
I am.
The bear shook off the last of the irritation. Its eyes locked onto Kane once more. The next charge would be a kill. Zex knew this. Kane knew this. And yet, the human smiled. All right, big guy, let's do this. The bear lunged. Kane moved fast, faster than Zex's motion tracking software anticipated. Instead of dodging, Kane stepped in, closing the gap. The bear swung, a massive paw, claws extended. Kane ducked. The razor-sharp claws missed his skull by millimeters, tearing through the fabric of his sleeve, leaving deep gashes in his arm. Kane didn't flinch. Instead, he drove his knife forward. A small, primitive blade, utterly insufficient against a creature of this size. And yet it found its mark. Slicing into the muscle at the bear's shoulder, the animal bellowed in rage, twisting violently, trying to shake off the pain. Kane moved again, not retreating, pushing forward. Apex predators do not expect their prey to fight back. Kane was no prey. Zex watched in stunned horror as the human continued pressing the attack. A strike to the ribs. A slash across the foreleg, every movement precise, intentional, relentless. And the bear? It hesitated. It was injured. It was confused. For the first time in its life, it was losing. The battle lasted 46 seconds. 46 seconds of brutal, primal combat. Zex's internal data processors struggled to comprehend what it was witnessing. The human should not have won. The bear should not have lost. And yet, it collapsed. Its massive form slumped onto the ground, bleeding, breathing shallowly. Kane stepped back, his entire body coated in blood, his own and the bear's. His chest rose and fell in rapid bursts, his hands still clenched around his primitive weapons. He stood over the fallen predator, and then he sighed, not in relief, but in regrets. "Damn it," he muttered under his breath, rubbing the back of his neck. "I really didn't want to kill you." Zex had no words. There was no classification for this, no precedent, no logical explanation for what had just transpired. Kane had fought an apex predator 4 times his mass and won. Zex's mission parameters had just changed. This was no longer an observation study. This was a reclassification because humans were not mostly harmless. They were something else entirely, something far worse. And the universe had no idea. Zex's internal data processors struggled to recover from what it had just witnessed. The probabilities had been clear, 4% survival chance. And yet, the human was still standing. Blood dripped from his torn sleeve, mixing with the damp earth. His breathing was ragged, his muscles trembling from the exertion. But he had won. He had killed an apex predator with his bare hands. Zex had spent its entire career cataloging life forms across the known galaxy. It had seen species that could liquefy steel with a single exhale. Creatures whose hides were impervious to plasma rounds. Entire civilizations that had risen and fallen under the weight of evolutionary pressure. But never had it seen anything like this. Humans were not supposed to be apex predators. They were too small, too fragile. They lacked natural weapons. Their physical strength was unremarkable compared to the juggernauts that roamed their planet. And yet, here stood a man who had fought something 4 times his size and won. Not through raw power, not through superior weapons, but through something else entirely. Calculation, resilience, and an absolute refusal to accept death. The human ran a bloodied hand over his face, smearing streaks of red across his cheek. His eyes flickered to Zex, assessing, calculating. Then he gave a half smile. "You still recording?" Zex realized with some degree of horror that it had not stopped recording since the fight began. Every movement, every sound, every impossible moment captured. The Academy would review this footage 1,000 times over, and they still wouldn't understand because this defied classification. Zex slowly nodded. "Yes, the data is being stored in real time." Kane exhaled, rolling his shoulder as if to test the damage. His movements were controlled, as if years of injury had taught him exactly how much pain he could afford to ignore. "Good, because this is gonna blow some minds." He let out a small, breathless chuckle, then winced as the action pulled at the deep gashes in his arm. Zex's processors flagged multiple lacerations, blunt force trauma, possible fractures. "You require immediate medical attention." Kane looked down at himself as if only now registering the extent of his injuries. Then he shrugged. It had worse. The walk back to camp was slow, not because Kane was struggling, but because he refused to move any faster. Zex watched with detached fascination as the human stopped to wash his hands in the cold river, rubbing away the blood and dirt with casual efficiency. His body language was relaxed, his heart rate was already returning to baseline, his adrenaline levels were stabilizing. This was normal for him. Zex adjusted its internal database. Humans engage in life or death combat as a routine occurrence? The implications were unsettling. Zex could already see the headlines in the next xenobiology review papers. Homo sapiens evolutionary paradox or galactic threat. The only thing more terrifying than a species capable of this level of violence was one that treated it as a footnote in their daily lives. Back at the campsite, Kane finally allowed himself to sit. He rolled his sleeve up, examining the deep gashes left by the bear's claws. Zex scanned the wounds again, already preparing a report for the academy. The probability of infection is high, the bacteria in a bear's claws. Yeah, I know, Kane muttered. Pulling a small metal container from his pack, he unscrewed the cap, poured a clear liquid over the wounds, and Zex's audio receptors registered a sharp inhalation of pain. Kane clenched his jaw as the disinfectant burned into the open cuts. Zex identified the chemical components instantly. Ethanol, hydrogen peroxide, antiseptic, primitive but effective. Kane wiped away the excess blood, then reached for a strip of fabric, wrapping the wound with precise, practiced efficiency. Zex observed in silence. There was no hesitation, no visible distress beyond the momentary discomfort of pain. This wasn't a survival instinct. This was a routine, as if he had done this dozens, maybe hundreds of times before. Zex made its decision. I require an answer. Kane raised an eyebrow, still tying the final knot in the bandage. To what? How many times? Kane's movements stilled. What? Zex's voice remained steady. How many times have you survived encounters that should have killed you? For the first time since their meeting, Kane didn't answer right away. He sat there, rolling the question around in his mind. Not because he didn't want to answer, but because he was actually counting. Zex's processor stalled. The human had to count. After a moment, Kane exhaled through his nose, then chuckled softly. More than I should have. That was not an answer that should exist. Zex recalculated everything. That night, the fire crackled softly, the wind whistled through the trees. Zex remained motionless, processing the sheer weight of its findings. This mission had started with one goal: verify if humans truly defy classification. Now, that answer was unquestionable. They did. And the galaxy had no idea what it was dealing with. Kane stretched out near the fire, one arm resting behind his head, his injured arm still wrapped, but the pain no longer seemed to register. He glanced at Zex with mild amusement. You're thinking pretty hard over there. Zex hesitated, then spoke the truth. Your species classification is catastrophically inaccurate. Kane smirked. Yeah? Yes. A beat of silence. Then Kane let out a low chuckle, shaking his head. You haven't even seen the impressive stuff yet? Zex's sensory receptors flared. This was not impressive. Kane grinned. Nah, this was just improvisation. Zex had no response for that. Somewhere in the vast reaches of space, the bureaucratic offices of the Galactic Classification Authority were about to be set on fire, because mostly Harmless was about to be rewritten. Permanently. The fire had burned down to embers, flickering in the cold night air, casting long shadows against the trees. Zex had remained motionless for several hours, running calculations, rewriting probability models, updating its internal threat assessment database. Nothing made sense. Humans were a biological contradiction, too fragile to survive this planet. Yet, too resilient to die. Kane had no right to still be alive. And yet, there he was, resting near the fire, one arm tucked behind his head, looking utterly unbothered. Zex finally spoke. Your species classification must be revised. Kane opened one eye, glancing at the alien across the fire. Then he smirked. Took you long enough. Zex hesitated. You expected this. Kane stretched, wincing slightly as his injured arm protested the movement, then let out a low chuckle. Buddy, you're not the first alien to figure out humans don't make sense. Zex's internal systems froze. That was not an expected response. Clarify. Kane yawned, sitting up slightly, his injured arm rested across his knee, but there was no urgency in his movements. I mean exactly what I said. His gaze flickered to the darkness beyond the fire, as if he were considering something. Then he sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. You guys keep showing up, watching us, taking notes, and every damn time you think you're the first ones to do it. Zex's neural processor stalled. Multiple species have conducted observation missions on Earth. Kane smirked. Oh yeah, you're not special, buddy. Zex's entire research directive shattered. This mission had been classified as First Contact, an unprecedented scientific expedition. Yet now, this human was implying that it wasn't the first or even the second. How many? How long? How much had been missed? Zex recalculated the probabilities, but there was no logical framework for this information. It spoke carefully. The Galactic Classification Authority has no records of prior contact. Kane huffed a laugh. Yeah, probably because you guys suck at paperwork. Zex blinked, all four of its eyes processing the sheer disrespect of that statement. That is highly unlikely. Kane shrugged. Whatever you say. You are implying that multiple extraterrestrial species have observed Earth without official documentation. Kane took a sip of water, completely unbothered. Yeah, pretty much. Zex's internal alarm systems fired at maximum capacity. This was not how First Contact was supposed to go. The human should be asking questions, panicking, showing signs of existential dread at the knowledge that his species had been watched from the shadows for decades. But Kane wasn't reacting at all. If anything, he was amused. So let me guess, Kane tilted his head. You guys thought we were harmless, didn't you? Zex's voice was carefully neutral. Mostly harmless. The human laughed. A full, unrestrained laugh. Holy shit, who the hell wrote that? Zex hesitated. The classification was based on statistical analysis. Kane wiped at his eyes, still grinning. God, that's funny, mostly harmless. You guys really have no clue, huh? Zex didn't respond. Because for the first time, it wasn't sure what to say. Kane leaned back, gaze flickering toward the sky, toward the observation ships he knew were watching. Let me guess, he murmured, you guys have a whole committee trying to decide what to do now, huh? Zex did not confirm or deny, but Kane chuckled anyway. Yep, called it. He let the silence stretch for a moment before finally speaking again. Well, whatever it is you're thinking. His grin sharpened. You're probably wrong. Zex's sensors flickered. Explain. Kane exhaled, rubbing at his tired eyes before looking back at the alien with something almost sympathetic. You guys think this is bad? He gestured vaguely to his injuries. Think what I did to that bear was impressive? Zex did not answer, but the human's grin widened. This wasn't even close to impressive. Zex's entire threat matrix collapsed. Clarify. Kane tilted his head. You want to know what happens when we actually prepare for something. Zex's audio receptors picked up a subtle shift in the human's heart rate. Not fear. Fear. Not distress. Something else? You want to see what we can do with actual weapons? Silence. The fire crackled softly, the wind rustled through the trees. Then Kane grinned again. Yeah, that's what I thought. The Galactic Classification Authority received Zex's full report 27 days later. They had reviewed exactly 17 seconds of footage before an emergency assembly was called. By the time the committee finished rewriting the official classification, the universal consensus was clear. Humanity was not mostly harmless. They were a deathworlder species, Class 1. Extreme caution advised. Paradoxical threat assessment. Do not provoke. And yet, for all the warnings, all the new security protocols, the one unspoken realization hung heavy over the entire meeting. The humans already knew they were being watched. They had known for decades, and they had let it happen. Because they weren't afraid. They were confident. And that was more terrifying than anything. Somewhere in the forests of Earth, Kane tilted his head to the sky. Another ship hovered just above the tree line, cloaked, invisible to human eyes. He smirked. Then he raised a hand and waved. The ship immediately cloaked further and pulled away. Kane just laughed. Yeah, thought so. Then he turned back to his path and kept walking. Because, after all, this wasn't his first time.